Welcome to the 40 Finance channel. Today we're talking about Meta stock coming off of the heels of their earnings report on January 29th. It's a very, very positive earnings report, a significant beat on both the EPS and the revenue. And with these changes, with this new information that we have and the guidance going forward in 2025, I want to talk about how the fundamentals have changed for Meta. Where we sit now at a stock price of $700, what does that mean in terms of the projections for EPS as well as where the multiple sits today? Now, when you're looking at mega cap stocks like Meta and hundreds of others that have EPS, they have an established multiple / PE that they trade at, it becomes like relatively predictable in some ways on where the price is going to go. And usually the fork in the road for an investor or somebody doing a YouTube video like me, as far as predictions go, is you have to lean towards what will change. Will the multiple change? Okay, will the multiple change the price that people are willing to pay for earnings? Or will the EPS change? Will the bottom line change somewhere before the end of the fiscal year? And that's kind of the balance. So what we'll do today is we'll look at a couple different scenarios. One where we are today, and what if the EPS changes? Then what if the multiple changes? And it's all very simple calculations that you can do at home. Now, as always, we'll be pulling our data from Seeking Alpha Premium. If you're interested in learning more about Seeking Alpha, check out the link in the description, potentially support my channel. You get a 7-day free trial as well as money off of your first year. So it's a really good deal. I use this platform all the time on my videos, so definitely check that out. All right, so the bottom line on last quarter's earnings for Meta, which this is a really good time to get into fundamentals with Meta because they just announced Q4. And so obviously we have a regular fiscal year calendar to work with here in January. It just makes the calculations much more streamlined. But they announced on the 29th, I mentioned the strong beat. They beat their EPS line by $1.28. That is roughly 15 to 17% over what analysts expected for the quarter. So that's huge. And then on the top line, or the revenue, they beat by $1 billion, $1.39 billion, and they made almost $50 billion. So very, very strong quarter. Now, what's interesting looking back at Q4 of 2024 is you had, of course, the election, and you had holiday shopping, e-commerce, whatever. It was going to be a banger of a quarter almost no matter what, but it is good to see that they came above the expectations that the street had. Now, here in this video, we're not worried about quarters as much as fiscal years. So if we take a look at what the EPS estimate is across all 4 quarters right now, and here on Seeking Alpha, we look fiscal period ending 2025. You have an EPS estimate of 25.24. That would total across all 4 quarters of about a 6% growth rate if this projection were to hit. Now, that's consensus, okay? And you've got 50 analysts. I don't know if you can see that, but there's 50 analysts who have all sort of thrown in their projection for the year. That's a lot. You don't usually see that many analysts, but like I said, in a popular Mag 7 stock like this, you've got a lot of interest. Now, with that, you've got lows and highs, and the high is 27.56. Okay, so consensus 25, the high is 27.56. For this particular video, I'm going to say they have a track record of outperformance, all right, that we've already established. So I'm going to go with 27. I'm going to say that Meta is on pace to exceed the consensus and hit $27 in earnings by the end of 2025. So remember that number. You'll see it on the board later. All right, valuation-wise, there's a couple numbers on the screen that we're going to use on the calculations. I just want to call them out. First, we have the forward gap PE as it stands today, prior to the opening of the market here today, it stood at 27.24. I think the stock's up about 2% here, but we'll just take the 27.24. Now, the 5-year average, okay, because this is when you're getting into multiples. So you have to project, and it's really an opinion, you have to project what multiple should Meta reasonably trade at this year at this point in time. I tend to use this number, which is the 5-year average that Seeking Alpha provides. 23.21 is where it's been over the past 5 years, and that incorporates all the ebbs and flows that we've seen in the market over the past 5 years. So I feel pretty good about using that number for basic calculations. In the case of Meta, since they're running a little hot right now, I'm going to round this up and make it a multiple of 24. So if it's 24, though, it is still below where we're trading at today in the 27.24 range. So we've got our fundamental elements, right? We have an earnings projection, both the consensus and the high. We know what the multiple is today, and we know what it has been over the past 5 years. So we have some good numbers in there to make some sort of projection on which way this stock goes heading into the end of the year. So the current forward PE that we saw was 27.24 versus my rounded up number of 24 for the 5-year average. And getting the multiple right is almost more important than the EPS, because you're talking about something being a multiple, right? You have to have, the difference between 27 times whatever you're holding versus 24 times, that's a significant difference. But if we say a multiple of 24 is the 5-year average, and remember, I rounded that up a little bit, and we took the current price today, $700 for the stock today. It's bouncing $699, $702, but 700 divided by a multiple of 24 tells me that the market today is expecting a $29.16 EPS. So the street today is saying the consensus is too low. The consensus EPS projections that 50 plus analysts put together, that is too low. We're calling it 29 on an average valuation scale. And as a refresher, that consensus EPS for 2025 was about $25 in earnings. 27 was the high. Remember, I told you I'd use 27 as the high EPS since Meta has some pretty good momentum right now. Now, if you took this so-called high estimate of $27 annual EPS and you multiplied it by the 5-year multiple of 24, and I got this down here, if you take 27 times 24, you get a stock price of 648. But there's two elements that I manipulated in that formula, right? I lowered the valuation from where it was today. Today, you're at 27.24, 27 times earnings, and I chose 27 as my earnings projection for 2025, but the street today is saying 29 based solely on the stock price. All right, so I've thrown a few different numbers at you. How can we kind of boil this down to figure out in a more simplistic way which way Meta goes, say, from here? Well, what will change in your opinion, okay? Do you think the multiple changes, or do you think the EPS changes for Meta? And the answer could be both. It just depends on which direction you see things. I think, coming off of a high right now, that the current forward PE of 27, I anticipate that that will come down very slightly. But that's my opinion, and it's something that you would have to think about. Would you pay 27 times Meta right now if you had no shares and you were just coming into the market and you were comparing all the different stocks that are available? Now, the EPS part of the equation is not our choice, Okay, they are going to have an EPS number. The only thing that changes is whether it comes in line with consensus or goes above or could, technically come in under as well. Right now, I would say the market is projecting closer to 29. I'm going to take 27, but that's still above the overall consensus of 25. If you think the EPS is going to come in higher than the 25 consensus, then you need approximately a 20% outperformance over the analysts, 20% outperformance on the current consensus of 25. That's what you need to happen with Meta stock to validate the price that it's at today. Now, for me personally, I think it'll be a combination. I think you're going to get a couple points off the PE, and I think that this $27 high end of the analyst picks is going to come in line. I feel better about the $27 than I do the market's current anticipation of 29. Now, eventually, as I've highlighted here, people will start looking at 2026, but that is not going to happen right here when it comes to analyst consensus and whatnot. Those numbers are out there. Those projections exist out in the internet. But for most of certainly the spring, I would argue well into the 4th of July, you're going to have the focus on 2025. And as we get closer to Q4 earnings, much later in the year, fall, something like that, then you can change this whole formula and start to use 2026 projections. All right, so bottom line for me, based on these projections, I think there will be an opportunity to get Meta for 648, 650, just call it, somewhere in that neighborhood. There will be an opportunity to buy the stock at that price over, let's just call it, the next 3 months or so. How about sometime before the next earnings call? So that's a simple fundamental analysis of Meta stock right now at the end of January 2025. What do you think will change on the horizon for Meta? Do you think that the EPS will continue to grow at an insane pace, well past projections? Or do you think the multiple will change? Could it go even higher than it is today, which is above the 5-year average? Or does it shrink? Or some combination of both? Let me know what you think in the comments. And don't forget to check out that special offer for Seeking Alpha down below. Get yourself a 7-day free trial. I hope everyone's doing well. We'll see you on the next video.